Yeah, hi. Hello everybody. Always good to meet up with Ember Europe again. Definitely the coolest Ember meetup right now. Uh, I don't have like a big agenda planned for this. I'm happy to take questions. I do have a couple topics to start things off with that are kind of status update type things for folks. Um, I liked what Chris just said about, some of the benefits he's seeing when teams go on to the newer build tooling being that it unlocks a bunch of other creativity and investment and, just unblocks people from making things to work the way they want them to work. That really was always my high level goal with the why to do embroidery in the first place. It's not about just like adopting one particular specific new generation of build tooling or anything like that. It's really about making it much easier to understand and contribute to all the things that we're all using all the time by getting rid of um, stuff that was hard to understand, right? Stuff that was hard to understand or unnecessarily bespoke given the state of the world. The switch to Vite as default is a good example of that. And the benefit you get is just like beyond the actual tool being pretty good is that the amount of learning materials, plugins, ecosystem integrations that you have access to is big. Um, and also like the amount of like the materials to help you learn how to contribute to those things is also big, right? Because even Vite is piggybacking off of the even earlier and bigger roll-up APIs in terms of how you extend the tool. So like all of that is all about dramatically easing the bar to being able to feel confident that you can contribute to customize and improve things. So that's been a high level goal. And so I'm working on more of that now too, right? So we've succeeded in making the new tooling the default. Obviously, that means it's still under active development and maintenance, and there's lots of stuff we're still doing. But at this point, it's all about, steady improvement because we've gotten there in terms of getting the default experience for app authors onto that. Um, so in terms of other things that are on my radar, I still am very focused on making it easier for people to understand, contribute, fix, and improve everything about our ecosystem. So a a very kind of in the weeds and boring thing that I think is actually super valuable that is ongoing right now is that we are working to take the Ember repo and the Glimmer VM mono repo and make them be one repo with one integrated test suite and one holistic development environment. And the reason those two are separate is historic. Like it was the right choice at the time. It's very much an example of a Conway's Law kind of thing. That's the idea that the shape that software takes follows the shape of the organizations that are building it. And when that project got off the ground, there was one group of people working on Glimmer VM and a different group of people working on Ember proper. And so the two were separate repos, and there was a whole integration process between them. And that's just we've evolved way past that because Glimmer VM is the core guts of how Ember works now. It's not experimental. It's not been experimental for a super long time. It's the foundations Ember is built on. Um, and also just over time as the people and teams have evolved, there's not separate people working on both. It's the same people working on both. And so the split is just unnecessary at this point. And I think it's one of the things that makes the whole system mystifying, harder to contribute to, harder to understand. Even just in terms of like, where's the right one to file a bug on, or is the bug filed on one and not the other? Where do I send the PR? Like, when will it actually get out in Ember if I fix it in Glimmer? Um, all those questions just go away if it's actually a one monorepo with one integrated test suite and one release process. And so, mostly Katie Gangler and myself have been working on this little by little. We have just like a recurring time on the calendar every week where we work on things that Ember needs. The meeting's in the Discord and folks can join it at any time. It's actually called Read the Docs because the original thing we were planning to do at that time was work on docs. But every time we start doing that, we see something else in the backlog of like critical things to do. And so we've been working on picking off those kind of projects that are just like um, I'd almost say like boring and in the weeds kind of projects that are just so high leverage. So anyway, We are super close now to finishing the repo merge. And it's been really interesting to see the things we've already fixed and cleaned up and improved just as we've gotten to the point where we can have all the test suites running as one test suite and have the repos together. Um, just this week, we found a test that was failing when we had brought the repos together, and it had been passing, and the test was an attempt at reproducing an actual open bug report in Ember, and Preston wrote the test, but it passed in Glimmer. And he's like, "Well, I guess I didn't reproduce the bug, but we kept the test because it was a good test we didn't have coverage for." Well, when we merge the repos and run that test in the real context of Ember and not the kind of fake environment the Glimmer VM was testing, lo and behold, the test fails, and we have a great reproduction of the bug, which can now go get fixed. So just an example of the friction that we're shaving away by having one combined environment and making it easier to contribute to. So I'm excited for that as like um, it's a very boring kind of project, but one that I think is super high leverage. Um, Also just like basic performance and cleanup improvements in the code base that this is going to allow because we have a bunch of effectively like pluggable layers between Ember and Glimmer that really don't need to be pluggable. Like they're all one project, right? We can smooth that out, not to completely lose our layering. Like layering is good, even when the layers are in your own system, but there's a bunch of stuff there that is unnecessarily uh, isolated. So it's going to improve the code base, make it smaller, and make it less buggy. Um, so that's an example of continuing to invest in making it much easier to contribute that I'm excited about. Um, Another kind of small example of just like doing cleanup that makes everything more understandable is we landed a deprecation in Ember 6, 8, 10? 8, 8. The one that's goes out now, 6, 8. Um, which finally deprecates that Ember's source package itself has AMD bundles in it. And for the most part, it's a pretty invisible change to users. You'll see a deprecation message that says, "Oh, you got to set this setting now so you stop using the AMD bundles," and that mostly just works. Anybody who's already on Inverter with Vite is already was past this change, and anybody who is on Inverter Webpack with the static Ember source flag true is already past this change. But this is going to bring everybody else along, and it means that up until now, you could have opted off of doing Ember with AMD, but Ember itself had all these fairly complicated pre-built AMD bundles in its published source that were always available there to use, and that's gonna end at Ember 7, so gets off those. And so that's just another example of making the whole system more understandable and easier to contribute to and easier to debug because when Ember is just shipped as a bunch of plain old ES modules, your experience of like debugging into it or contributing to it is just a lot more understandable. So it's about getting rid of cruft in the infrastructure that today is an impediment to people contributing. So examples of things that are much easier to do once we don't have to support this old format of the bundles is there's a lot of features we could take advantage of in our environments in terms of, using standard tooling to like strip out deprecated features. Let you opt out early if you're making a brand new app and you don't need any old stuff. With the AMD bundles around, it's very hard to take out pieces of Ember and only get pieces. With the loose modules, it's very easy, right, to make that a standard thing so that new apps don't have old stuff, even if the old stuff continues to work for the people who need it. So anyway, that's another example of kind of just we're in a big garbage collection cleanup kind of phase right now because we're getting the benefits from all of this work we've been doing and getting people onto the new tooling. Um, so that's not to say there isn't also a bunch of interest in, new user-facing features and things like that. I think we have a bunch of in-flight work in terms of RFCs that we've agreed to do and just haven't done yet. And some of those are actually waiting behind the repo merge because it's just going to be so much easier to work in the code base then. So for example, like there's some small improvements like making a few more things built in so they don't have to be imported. This was feedback that came out of, as people adopt template tag and most stuff's importable. There's a few core things that make sense to be keywords. So we have RFCs approving like on and hash and array and a few other things as built-ins, so you don't have to import them. And it's the kind of feature that today spans across both repos in an annoying way, and so it's just like nobody's implemented it. It's much easier to do in the combined repo, so that's coming pretty soon. Um, and then the sorry, I lost my train of thought because I got a notification and I was making sure it wasn't somebody here telling me like, "Hey, your audio's not working." Um, yeah. So anyway, that was overall just to say like we're in a big garbage collection pass, but there's also like all of that is clearing the decks for a whole bunch of feature work as well. And I think folks have a list of stuff they want to see in terms of new feature space. I continue to experiment and contribute with like designs for what does a really nice usable Ember resources like as default API for how we do asynchrony in Ember look, and that as a foundation for how does like next generation routing look. All that is good stuff to look for down the pipe. Um, and I guess in terms of my little this is the almost the end of what I've prepared. The rest can be questions. I have one other thing that I've actually picked up very recently, just because a client was asking about it, which is I haven't done anything on animations in a long time. Folks might know that I've made a couple generations of animation tools for Ember, but a nice thing about animations right now in the world is that the view transitions API in browsers is actually quite good. And we didn't have that in the past when we were making generations of Liquid Fire and Ember Animated. And thankfully, the view transitions API in browsers is really it's designed with apps like Ember apps in mind. It can do uh, it can do animations in a full page transition, like going from web page A to web page B. You can actually in CSS make rules about how those pages animate together, and that's cool. But that doesn't so much apply inside of an Ember app where you're doing single page app transitions within one logical web page. But the View Transitions API also has explicit hooks so that you can ask for all that functionality inside of your single page application like an Ember app. And so it has basically all the right affordances we want, so that so much of the work that has to happen in a library like Ember Animated is now things the browser can do for you, and then you can make all your stylistic choices about animations in standard CSS using the new affordances of the View Transitions API. I think that's really, really nice. And so in terms of how you integrate that with Ember, the main trick is that you really want the DOM mutations for, when you're gonna change something and you want to animate between the DOM before the change and the DOM after the change. View Transitions API gives you a start transition function that you can call that sets the browser up to basically say the browser is going to actually, you can kind of imagine it as the browser is going to screenshot the old version. Then it's going to call your function, which is supposed to let the update happen. And then you're going to say, okay, I'm done updating. And then it's going to effectively snapshot the new version. And then it applies all your CSS rules to make them beautifully animate between. Right. And so in the Ember context, there's a few ways you can hook into that. I've seen folks demoing it where our router already is kind of a place where you have a little of that asynchrony and you can kind of wrap route transitions. But to do it in general, the nicest thing would be a low-level feature in Glimmer where you could basically take a block of your template and say, I want to control the timing of the re-render of this block so that I can wrap it in a start view transition. And that would basically just make it fully automatic and fully magical. Anything reactive that affects that render would be subject to animation rules. So that's like I want to build that. That requires hooking directly into fairly low level in Glimmer to make that possible. Because today there's not a possible like make a component that would actually, when you get to it, it basically like takes over the re-render of its children and would pause and say like, "Hey Glimmer, like let me tell you when I want to keep going inside." So it would be a timing change in the core of Glimmer. So that's a fairly low level change. I don't think it's a gigantic one, but it's in the weeds and definitely comes after the some of the cleanups we want to do down in the low level and the Glimmer Ember merge and all that. But in the nearer term, the thing I'm experimenting with is just if you're willing to treat your the data whose changes cause animations a little bit special in the sense of saying I don't want to just have a Boolean for like is this panel open or not. I'm going to make an animatable Boolean and it's going to have like a dot current and a set on it. As long as you're willing to go through that little bit of ceremony, you can do all of it now because you can make that animatable value be one that when you set it, it schedules the view transition. It then once it knows its time tells it basically reflects the track state to Ember, lets a render happen, and then tells the animation system the render has happened. So I've been experimenting with that. I don't really have code to show yet. I literally just started this in the last few hours, but it's going along very fast. And it really was because people asked me about it literally today. Um, but it turns out it's pretty easy to get that basic thing working. The hard part is I now like I have to go and really get good at the view transition CSS API, which is hard to wrap your head around. There's a bunch of demos to learn from though, and thankfully it is web standard, right? You get to learn it once, so it's good. So anyway, that was all the things I like wanted to throw out there as possible topics and things to make people aware of. Happy to then take questions and discussion. Um, We could do it in the chat or people couldn't unmute themselves. That's fine too.
I'm just going to say thank you for coming and talking about this, and also thank you for the surprise view transitions appearance. I didn't know you were going to talk about that, and I'm very excited about
I didn't know that either until, like I said, like this morning.
it.
Yeah. Um, I had experimented with it a while back, but it recently came up again enough that I had a little time to work on it, and I think it's pretty good. So yeah, I like I said, I have an actual project where it's needed. So I'm gonna try to get an actual shareable thing up soon, and I'll definitely post about it when I do.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you have a blog these days? Do you blog anywhere?
I do own a blog. It hasn't got any new content on it, but eaf4.com is me. It's
Hmm.
just I don't know when the last one was. It's probably 6 or 7 years ago.
I mean, that's a good
Um,
one to break
yeah, I could
your
break my streak with a new one. That'd be good. It
yeah,
would
that'd
be
be
good
good.
to make it a little fresher for sure. I mean, there's definitely things to talk about, or on the or like also on Ember's own blog. Like I was trying to remember to write something. I think the last thing I wrote for that ended up staying in draft. There's something I need to finish. I forgot what it was.
It was the template tag code mod.
It was the template
Um,
tag code mod. You're right.
yeah,
Another
yeah,
very
that
good
was a
piece
while
of
ago.
tech people should use if they're not aware of it. Um, template tag code mod is great um, because it unlocks so much else and just cleans up your code, and also because it is really built on. Even though the template tag code mod isn't that old, it's something we kind of just put in at a fairly late phase in the Embroider process. It's built directly on all of the infrastructure of Embroider for figuring out there's a long laundry list of legacy behaviors that could be going on in your app and in its add-ons and their add-ons. And I think people underestimate just like there's a lot there. And so you can do like a 80% solution that doesn't do all the things Embroider does. Um, but like we did all that work already. We have these libraries that know how to how to understand all the legacy stuff in an Ember app, and could we built them to be the build. But it turns out instead of doing them in the build, doing them in a code mod means you get to do them only once and then never have to do them again. And that's really nice for your build performance and also your understandability as a developer. So um, that turned into be a really nice, unplanned usage of the kind of core tech we built for Embroider, which was always supposed to be general. It's like general purpose tooling for understanding Ember apps and converting them to more standard stuff, right? And so not just like let's support Webpack or let's support Vite. It's more like here's a toolbox for understanding the things in Ember apps that you might have to understand to get over the hump of I have all this existing ecosystem of older code, but I want to understand it. And that's how to think about Embroider at the high level. Why is Embroider different than Vite? Right? It's because like Embroider is a lot like a toolbox for understanding Ember apps, and we're able to use that on the template tag code mod too. It was really nice.
I think this is a great topic to move into our first question from Liam. Maybe an update on where we're at with the V2 add-on blueprint becoming default.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good point. And so, like when I said we can kind of declare victory on the app side, this is the one that's not done as a default. Um, I think a lot of folks in the know who like are the kind of people who go to meetups and read blog posts and read RFCs and stuff probably know that like you for a long time you've been able to author add-ons that publish in a new format, that a V2 format, and that was really built to power Embroider and make Ember apps more understandable to users and build tooling. Um, and that was done as an actual Ember RFC to make a standard quite a while ago. It was like the first step really of Embroider because um, it's which makes sense when you think about the fact that the ecosystem costs of like how do you run a project like Embroider to move everybody together to a new thing. It really has to start with the add-on, making having a goal for the add-ons so that they're not dragging down the apps, right? So it's about having a goal for what an add-on can contain that's much more simple and understandable than the classic add-ons. And for context for folks who don't know, so like a traditional Ember add-on, which now we kind of retcon as a V1 add-on, um, really is super, super flexible. At its root, an add-on isn't really like a library. It's a program that emits a library on the fly. So, like in the most general case, it can do anything it wants, and it has a lot of visibility into the rest of your app and other add-ons. And so, even though most of them act like libraries and do pretty simple things, they have the flexibility to do literally anything. And so, to turn them into statically analyzable stuff, you really have to be able to run their custom hooks and see what comes out, and then reason about how would that be how would that actually run in an Ember app, and how do the add-ons all merge together, and how do they merge with your app and all those things. So anyway, V1 add-ons are just way too flexible, and so V2 add-ons exist as a publication format. So that means like the thing that you download from npm that goes next into your node modules folder that your app is supposed to rely on. That format that goes to npm is what we formalized quite a while back in that RFC. And so that's been good. That's like stable low-level foundations. What we didn't do anything about was deciding what's the actual authoring experience for making one of those add-ons, right? We decided the publication format. So for example, like you don't publish any GJS files, you publish JavaScript files. They should be built to GJS already. And also you don't publish any TypeScript files. You should publish JavaScript files with DTS files if you've got types. So that's fairly that's examples of fairly standard things that add-ons can do. There's a few other things too in terms of they are allowed to have some extra metadata in their package JSON that helps them integrate with Ember and be compatible with older patterns. So anyway, there's so we had to build tooling to help people do this, right? You do want a nice development experience for your add-on authors. They need to be able to use features like GJS and TypeScript and all of that, but then also publish valid V2 add-ons that don't have all that stuff. So we have primarily in the embroider slash add-on dev packages where the tooling is to power a lot of that stuff. And we've iterated over time what the actual authoring experience is like. And so a big early kind of back and forth was around how to do test applications, how to do testing, because initially it wasn't easy yet to have a test suite within your actual library. And so it was easier to make, basically, you had to have a whole Ember app to test with. And so, like in classic apps, that's the dummy app, which is very special cased and makes so much of the code in the ecosystem more complicated because they all have to remember to work for dummy apps, which are weird compared to real apps. Under Embroider currently there aren't any dummy apps anymore supported. And so if you want to have an app to test your library in, you need to actually have an app. And historically that has required a full npm package with its own package JSON. So for a while there, all V2 add-on authoring was done as monorepos, and that's not so nice. Monorepos are useful when you have a lot of packages, but when you're just trying to ship one thing, having a monorepo for your add-on and its test app is a little annoying, and just unnecessarily complicated. So in the most current iteration of V2 add-on authoring that we've solved those problems because we got Embroider to the point where we can totally do a test suite inside of a library and it's fine. So that had been a blocker for a long time. Um, the last thing that it the like the leading edge of Blocker still on the experience is a little bit of implementation work around how we do the feature that in an app, so the V2 app, if you generate a brand new Ember app today with the latest version of Ember CLI, you'll get a V app, and it will use a feature called concat modules in Embroider, which is you import from, Embroider slash virtual slash concat modules, and you stick that thing into your app's resolver. And the point of that is like that is how all your add-ons can do things like inject services into your app. Um, that's necessary for sure to keep things working. And we would like to do a new like a next gen services RFC so that they don't have to be, globally smashed into your app's namespace and all that sort of stuff. Um, but to keep things working, like you want this feature. And the big reason you want it as a special feature and not something you manually have to do is that it does require like deep knowledge of the add-on graph, right? So like not only do you have to care about your add-ons, but you have to care about their add-ons. And it's very painful in an ecosystem when there's no kind of abstraction over that stuff. You don't really want people to have to know when one of their add-ons decides to shift an inner add-on from one implementation or version to another, right? You don't want that stuff exposed. So you really want to be able to abstract over these kind of integration features. So that's why apps have this capability to get the compat modules. And like there's even more complexity to it, which we don't have to go into, but those who know about app tree merging in the history of Ember, that's still a thing. So like modules from add-ons that would have collided with a module from your app get stomped on by the app, and the compound modules tree takes care of all that stuff. Anyway, uh, we don't have an equivalent feature for the author of a V2 add-on who's trying to do their tests today. And so if you're a V2 add-on author and you're trying to write a test suite and your add-on uses other add-ons, today you'd actually have to be aware of like every deep down add-on that might want to register a service or something to keep your test suite working. And that's very annoying and is a kind of abstraction violation. So we want to make sure that either the existing Compat modules feature is adapted to work well enough in that context where it's being used not in an app, but in the test suite of a library. Or we need to just tweak the APIs there and make a slightly different thing to use in that case. But that's the remaining blocker. It's basically from actual feedback of users trying to use the current blueprint and saying like this is a pain point. So that's the last known open issue that's being worked on before we think that the RFC is ready to be final. Um, and of course, to ship it, like work needs to be done on documentation and teaching and all that stuff. Um, I kind of have in my head a dream example of how you would document blueprints, and requires technical work to build it, and I'm not signing up right now, but I really want like a version of a documentation viewer where you navigate by the file structure of the blueprint, right? So like you could open the package JSON in the docs, and it would have the default contents of package JSON all annotated beside it with you have this package because of blah blah blah. You have this package because of blah blah blah. You could open the Vite config from that the blueprint gives you, and beside it would have all the text explaining why each line is there. That's how I would love to document the blueprints. If somebody wants to build that, you should definitely go build that and add it to, our doc sites. Um, but in the meantime, that's not a blocker for getting the RFC merged. I think the earlier thing I talked about with Confit modules is the only known remaining blocker. And that what this would unlock is changing the default behavior you get when you say, uh, when you use Ember CLI to generate a new add-on, you say Ember add-on. Today, you would still get a V1 add-on. And if you're in the know, you can pass the flags and get the V2 add-on, and lots of people are doing that. But until it's default, not everybody knows it's there, and not everybody's going to be willing to change away from the defaults, and that's a reasonable expectation. So that's why it is important. And it's also important because after we have done this, we can really start to get serious about pushing to people by starting to have a deprecation schedule around the old add-ons, right? Today, there's none of their behaviors. I mean, in general, V1 add-ons are not deprecated, right? A few of the things they do have steadily become deprecated, but ultimately, we do want to eventually send a signal that you shouldn't keep we shouldn't have to have these forever. And there's actually a pretty big carrot as an app author that if you drop the last V1 add-on from your dependencies, you can turn off the whole compat pre-build parts of Embroider, and like your build gets faster all by a significant amount, um, and faster and simpler by a significant amount. So they do have a cost to apps, and so getting everybody to the point where they don't need any V1 add-ons anymore will be worth it. Um, the also the like that's not to and there's definitely ecosystem work to do on that as well. Like there are still V1 add-ons you depend on in a default install today. Some of them are even ours. Like Embroider macros ships V1 add-on runtime code, for example. Um, and that's fine, like because there's no timeline yet to completely drop that feature. But we have a to-do list. We've been chipping away at it. There's actually not much left on it now. When we do our tooling team weekly meetings, it's one of the things on our board. And we're down to quite a small number of V1 add-ons that are in a new, fresh app. But of course, typical apps that have been around a long time still have lots, and that's totally expected. Um, yeah. Other
Okay.
questions, topics?
Um, I don't see any other topics in the chat. And I guess this is probably a good place to end, unless you have any other inspirational things that you want to ask people to do or try out in the next month or two while they're off for the holidays.
Well, I so the deprecation that we landed in the new Ember is a good one to just be aware of. Well, actually, what I'd say is if you've got time to help contribute to open source over your holidays or whatever, um, if you have any opportunity to do so, take an app you're responsible for and try to get some upgrades done. Like we need more people who are ready to test, you know, in the ideal world, right? You're able to actually test Ember betas and stuff before they're stable. That of course means like has a cost. You've got to be up to new enough. So um it helps you a lot and it helps the community a lot if you're able to get updates done. Obviously, there's lots of real world reasons why you might be able not be able to take a big business app that you were responsible for and get it upgraded right away. But if you see opportunities, um, that is useful to everybody. Or, if you have some time to play with and kick the tires on new stuff, definitely just spin up a new app and try it out. We get, of course, like honestly, that's always valuable. It's always good to get learning feedback. And most of my attention, of course, has been on how we shepherd the hard case, right? All the big existing applications. So I'm always focusing on that. But build some, if like especially if your day-to-day work is stuck in an older Ember version where you don't use the cool stuff, um, like go build something small just for fun and the new stuff and take those learnings. Also, I would point out that there's not a lot of features like the core features of like the pillars of the new Ember edition, right, that we're on right now, really are mostly work back quite far. So Embroider works all the way back. Embroider Vite works all the way back to Ember 328. So nobody has that as an excuse to not adopt it. Um, and template tag also works back about as far. Like and that's writing single file components with your templates nicely embedded in your JavaScript with lexical JavaScript scope and all that stuff. So even if you're on an old code base that doesn't use those things, you can actually like take a little if you can have a little bit of side time for an experiment in that code base, add those new features and make like teach people how to do the new code in the new way. That would be a good call to action on kicking the tires on all the newer stuff. Yeah, so we could end there.
I think that is a perfect place to end. And if people wanted to reach out to you and like follow you on socials or something to know when your experiment on the animation stuff comes out, is it Blue Sky that is your usual?
I'm most active on Blue Sky. I don't post a super lot, but I'm always on there looking at what's going on. So yeah, I would post if I had stuff to share, and I can post stuff. I'll post stuff in the Discord for sure.
Ah, yes, of
If
course.
I have a library to share or at least a demo, I'll put it in the announce. Um, yeah,
Cool. Great. Well, thanks very much, Ed.